Welcome. Thank you for joining this NARF Federal Benefits Institute webinar. This presentation is uniquely designed for the federal community. This broadcast will be followed with a 1-hour online Q&A chat session. Please hold your questions until the end of the webinar and submit them with the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can, but it may not be possible to answer them all. If we are unable to answer your question through the Q&A session, please discuss your question with other members on NARF's FedHub at www.fedhub.narf.org. That is www.fedhub.narfe.org. Both the webinar and Q&A sessions will be recorded and, for NARF members, available for free in the webinar archive inside the Federal Benefits Institute on our website at the homepage, www.narf.org. That is www.narfe.org. Should you experience any technical difficulties during the presentation, please contact us for assistance toll-free at 1-800-456-8410. And after you connect, press 1. Again, that is 1-800-456-8410. And after you connect, press 1. On behalf of NARF, thank you for attending this Federal Benefits Institute webinar.
Good afternoon, folks. Hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for joining me in today's webinar. I'm Mark Keene, a certified financial planner located in the Washington, D.C. area and one of NARF's federal benefits experts. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I know everybody's busy, and so I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join me here for another year of the Thrift Savings Plan, Stay or Leave. I have been doing this presentation now for, I think this is the 4th year, and continue to do it because every year there's something new to talk about. TSP has made a lot of changes over the past handful of years, and this year is no exception, as we have the new Roth IRA plan conversion feature that was rolled out earlier this year. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. We're going to talk about some reasons why you should stay within the TSP. We'll counter that maybe with some reasons why you may want to think about leaving the TSP. Right, and we're going to definitely spend some time on that Roth IRA plan conversion feature. We're going to talk about, if you do want to move some or all of your money away from the TSP, how to do so. And we'll talk about buyer beware, as when you move money out of the TSP, it's kind of like the wild, wild west. There's a lot of options out there. So we'll cover some things that you want to take in consideration. But before I really jump in and get going into this webinar, I just want to point out that today's webinar is being recorded, and the presentation, along with the presentation slides, will be posted up to NARF's website. So please give us about 24 hours following the conclusion of the webinar to get that up there. All right. So after that housekeeping is out of the way, let's get started and talk about some reasons why you would want to stay with the TSP account. This is not an exclusive list here, or an all-inclusive list, I should say. Just a few of the big ones that we run across. I'm going to talk about other reasons besides this as well. But we'll talk about simplicity, right? There's a lot of benefits to keeping things simple. We'll talk about the withdrawal options with the TSP. They've been greatly improved over the years. Liability protection, how it compares to IRAs. Obviously, the TSP is a very low-cost plan. So we're going to talk about that and how that might compare against what you could get out in the IRA world. So simplicity, right? There's a lot of studies that have been done out there, and they've all kind of come to the same conclusion that really the more choices participants have, that it can negatively impact the outcomes, right? There's been a study that talks about more choices can reduce actual participation in the plan. More choices can lead to more conservative allocations and just suboptimal allocations and diversification in general. At one point in time, there was a study that said the number one way that participants allocate their accounts is just simply take all the funds available and divide it up equally, right? So obviously, if you get dozens of funds, that can create some big issues there. So in terms of simplicity, there's none better than, I think, the TSP account, right? We've got 5 individual investment options: the C, the S, the I, the F, and the G funds, right? They all track broad-based market indexes, with the exception of the G fund, which is a special fund that only TSP participants can access. But these individual funds are designed to give you exposure to specific asset classes. right? So for example, the C fund tracks US large cap stocks. The S fund are mid-size and small-size US companies. The I is international exposure, right? So you're getting specific exposure exposure to specific asset classes through these individual funds. Now, for those participants who may not know how to allocate among those 5 funds or what to do, there's the life cycle funds, right? These are just kind of the plug and play options. Super simple. You check a box, you put money in one of the funds, and that fund will in turn allocate the money amongst those 5 individual funds for you. You don't have to do anything. And they're designed so that it's kind of a target glide path. The closer that you get to that target retirement year, the more conservative that fund gets, right? And now even these funds have been expanded. You used to have a handful of funds. Now we have 2 handful of funds and some extra at 11, right? And it ranges from the L Income Fund, which is the most conservative fund, all the way up to the 2075 fund, the most aggressive in 5-year increments. So in terms of liability protection, right, there's a big difference between the TSP and the IRA when it comes to federal protection, right? The TSP, should we take a step back here, really employer-sponsored retirement plans like 401ks, TSP being included with the law here, offers the most federal protection against bankruptcy and civil liability that you can get, right? In other words, the account is fully protected against creditors and bankruptcy. So if you file for bankruptcy, your entire TSP is protected. If you get in a car wreck and kill somebody and get sued, right, your TSP is going to be protected in that case, right? IRAs are a little bit different, right? At the federal level, IRAs have pretty strong bankruptcy protection, right? For a contributory IRA account, you're making contributions to it. Up to $1.7 million of that IRA account is federally protected in the case of bankruptcy, right? And that's as of April 1st of 2025, if a bankruptcy was filed after April 1st, 2025. Below that, the amount was a little bit less, 1.6 million and change. So rollovers, right? If you happen to roll over a 401k or a TSP account into an IRA account, that money has unlimited federal protection in the case of bankruptcy. What does not have federal protection is civil lawsuits, right? That depends on the state law, the state in which you live, and state laws vary greatly. So it's important if you're considering moving your money out of the TSP to an IRA account that you understand what that protection is there. But I will give like a little public service announcement from just a general financial planning standpoint, and that get an umbrella liability policy, right? I mean, that's one of the foundations I think that you should have to protect your assets that are not federally protected against bankruptcy and civil lawsuits, right? So umbrella liability policy will sit on the liability coverage, sit on top of the liability coverage of your homeowners, your auto policy, so that if you did get sued for a wreck, an accident, as an example, that liability policy will afford some protection for you. I should really change this now because it's no longer improved withdrawal options. I would just say it's strong withdrawal options, right? They've definitely been enhanced over the years, starting with the TSP Modernization Act that goes all the way back to 2019 now. Prior to that, it was pretty rough for participants. Literally, participants could only take one partial withdrawal their entire lifetime, right? And then separate from that, they had to elect what the TSP referred to as a full withdrawal option, which would include installment payments or literally a full lump sum withdrawal for the annuity. So today, however, you have these single withdrawals. You have an unlimited amount of these single withdrawals that you can take. And in fact, this has even been enhanced within the past couple of years because those used to be restricted to one every 30 days. That restriction is no longer as of a couple of years ago. So you can take as many single withdrawals as you want. You can take them even if you have installment payments coming in. Pretty much the only restriction, I guess, or limitation to these single withdrawals is the minimum amount. You have to take a minimum of $1,000. Okay. But beyond that, you got a lot of flexibility there. Installment payments, you got a few different flavors. These are recurring automatic payments from the TSP to you. You can set them up monthly, quarterly, annually. You can specify a fixed dollar amount that you want to come out each interval, or you can have the TSP calculate what's called a life expectancy based payment, where they're using the IRS life expectancy tables to calculate that payment for you. And then the third choice is going to be this annuity, right? Where you're actually taking money out of your TSP account, handing it over to an insurance company, and in exchange, you're going to get lifetime annuity payments. And there's a lot of options, within that annuity choice that we're not going to get into here. But suffice to say, you've got a lot of flexibility with how you can access your funds in the TSP account now, which I would say would rival any IRA account out there at this point. And certainly a lot better than a lot of the 401k plans that I've seen out there that are more restrictive than the TSP account there. And everything's digital now, right? It used to be where you would literally have to print off a form, you would have to wet signature it. If you had a spouse, they would have to sign it for spousal consent. You'd have to take it to a bank or get somebody to notarize it for you, send it off to the TSP account, and then wait for your money to show up. So today, you can do everything online. Go to tsp.gov, log into your account, request a withdrawal. They will, if you have a spouse, they'll automatically email through DocuSign your spouse for them to do their spousal consent. So there's no printing, there's no scanning, there's no faxing. It's a super smooth process now. I will point out, though, that something that kind of trips people up is if they want to get money fast and quickly, make sure that you have wherever that destination is on file with the TSP before you need the money. So, for example, if you want to have them automatically transfer funds electronically into your bank account, make sure that bank account is on file with the TSP as a financial institution. Because when you go to take a withdrawal, if it's not there and you go to add your bank information now so they can transfer it electronically, there's a 7-day wait, right? So the TSP will not process that withdrawal until that bank, that financial institution has been on record for 7 days. Then you have to go back in and re-request that withdrawal. So just be aware of that. That's tripped up some people who all of a sudden found themselves in need of cash quickly, and then they had to wait for it. This is nothing new here, right? The one of the biggest benefits of the TSP since its inception really has been its low expense, and that still stands true today, right? So with these 5 individual funds here, you can see at the bottom, that's the key number, the percentage or the expense ratio stated as a percentage. These are extremely low. So for example, let's just pick the middle one, the C fund, right? It's one of the most popular investment options out there. That's not 3.5%, that's 0.035%, right? So 0.03% is the fee here. So it's extremely low cost, and we're going to compare that to some other options that you can get outside of the TSP. So you have kind of an apples to apples comparison, and you can see how low these fees and expenses are. So some of the lowest fees and expenses in town. What's been interesting to watch over the years that I've been doing this webinar is these fees moving up and down. There was a couple of years ago when they started enhancing the withdrawal options. I think administratively that added cost, and those expense ratios creeped up a little bit. And in the past couple of years, they've creeped back down a little bit. The only one that is higher this year than it was last year is the I fund. It was 0.038% last year, so it's 0.048% this year. And I don't know for sure, but I'm gonna make the assumption that's due to the change in index that the I fund is now tracking. Right, it used to just to track the MSCI EAFE index, which was a index made up of 2021 developed countries. So now they've expanded it to kind of like an all-world index, excluding the US and China and Hong Kong. So it's more broadly based international and get you more exposure. And that does, when you're getting into emerging economies, it's a little more expensive to invest in those type of stocks. So that's what I'm going to assume the reason behind the slight increase, the fees there. So typically when you take a distribution out of a retirement plan before 59.5, the IRS loves these half years. And so for whatever reason, the IRS said, retirement accounts, you cannot take money out prior to age 59.5, or if you do, you're going to be subject to this 10% early distribution penalty. right? So there's a couple of exceptions that you want to be aware of. One of them, this age 55 exception, only applies to employer-based plans, right? So if you find that you're going to be needing money for the age of 59 and a half, you want to pay attention here, right? Because there's a couple exceptions that you can may be eligible for to avoid this early distribution penalty. And by the way, again, this is not an exhaustive list. I've got this footnote down here, IRS Notice 2020-62 for a full list of these exceptions. But these are two of the key exceptions that a lot of TSP participants may run into or will want to consider. And the first is the age 55 exception, right? And so this is when you separate from service in the year or after the year you turn 55, there's an exception, right, to this 10% penalty. Or for public safety employees, that's going to be age 50. And a couple of years ago, they've expanded that to also include if you had at least 25 years of TSP eligible service, right? So you would also be be eligible for this exception here. So if you retire, let's say the year you turn 55, and you want to take money out of that TSP account, you're retired, you want to supplement your pension, well, you can do so, and you're not going to be subject to that 10% early distribution penalty, right? It's important to understand that this exception only applies to the employer plan from which you separated after 55 or the year you turn 55 or later, right? So if you've got some employer plans, from a previous employer, and you're working for the federal government now and you retire the year you turn 55 or 56 or 57, you can only take that distribution from the TSP account and have that avoiding the 10% early distribution penalty, okay? Also, it does not apply to IRAs. It only applies to employer plans. Now, what you could do is transfer that money in from those other plans and IRAs into your TSP account, separate from service, and then all that money would be eligible and exempt from that 10% early distribution penalty. So that's an important rule to understand because a lot of federal employees retire before 59 and a half. And if they transferred off all their money from the TSP to an IRA account, they've lost this exception, right? And every dollar coming out of that IRA, if they took a withdrawal, was going to be subject to that 10% early distribution penalty. So for beneficiaries, right? Now, this doesn't apply specifically and only to the TSP or only to employer plans. This is actually applicable to beneficiary IRAs as well. But beneficiaries are not subject to that 10% early distribution penalty, right? So one of the things that happens when a spouse is the beneficiary and inherits a TSP account from the original TSP participant. And that's key. We're going to go into detail about that in a little bit. But a surviving spouse inherits the TSP from the original TSP participant. The TSP will automatically transfer that TSP account over to what's called a beneficiary participant TSP account. Okay. Now, the surviving spouse is considered a beneficiary participant, not a normal participant, right? And that beneficiary participant can take penalty-free distributions from that beneficiary participant TSP account. It's a tongue twister, I know. So that's important. So if a spouse happens to be widowed and they're very young, they're younger than 59 and a half, and they need money from that TSP account, remember that they can take penalty-free distributions, okay? And we're going to come back to this here because I point this out as a reason why you can stay or should stay with the TSP. I'm also going to use this as an example why you'd want to leave the TSP, okay? And I think there's going to be a stronger case to be made for why a beneficiary participant should not maintain a TSP account. All right, so on to requirement distributions, right? So requirement distributions, basics here. Right now, the rule is the year you turn 73, that's your first RMD year, okay? That's when you have to start taking RMDs. There's an exception to that, though. We refer to it as the still working exception. And so technically speaking, the rule is you have to start your RMDs the year you turn 73 or the year you separate from service if later, okay? So what this means is that for those who are still working into their 70s, you can avoid, or you can not avoid entirely, but you can delay your requirement distributions, in the employer plans for what you're still working. So it's kind of like that age 55 exception. It only applies to the current employer's plan, okay? So again, if you've got some retirement plans from previous employers, if you got IRA accounts, When you turn 73, you're going to have to take RMDs from those other retirement plans. But if you're still working for the federal government, you will not have to take an RMD from the TSP account. So again, there's a little bit of a planning opportunity here because you could transfer in those other retirement plans. You could transfer in those IRA accounts into your TSP account. And that way you're delaying RMDs on those balances as well until you separate from service at least. And then the RMD will have to start the year you separate from service if it's after age 73. I'll point out in here that the rules have been changing, right? The RMD age used to be 70 and a half. Secure Act increased that to 72. Secure Act 2.0 increased it to 73, and it's scheduled to increase again to 75 beginning in the year 2033. So know your state rules. I talk about this a lot. I get a lot of emails about this. State rules vary tremendously, right? At the federal level, and that's what we focus on for the most part. That's what we hear a lot about because, from my perspective, I can't possibly know all the state rules, right? I know the federal rules. I don't know everybody's state rules though. So, but I just want to point out that states treat TSP distributions differently, or states may treat TSP distributions differently than IRA distributions, right? In other words, there are some states that will tax IRA distributions but not tax TSP distributions. A couple that come to mind: North Carolina, there's a special law that passed, Daily Act, and then in Kansas, they don't as well. I was emailing a NARF member on that one not too long ago. So there's a few states out there that do not tax TSP distributions but will tax IRA distributions. So if you're considering stay or leave, that should be an important factor. So as I mentioned earlier, right, we've got some new additions this year. We've got the new Roth in-plan conversion feature. It's a pretty exciting thing. It's been something that TSP participants, NARF members, been asking for a long time. They finally rolled it out earlier this year. What that means is that you no longer, if you want to do a Roth conversion, you no longer have to leave the TSP, right? Before this new feature, if you want to convert some of that traditional TSP balance to a Roth account, the only way that you can do it is by transferring that out into a Roth IRA account, right? So keep in mind, Roth conversions are taxable. I did a Roth conversion webinar earlier this year. So if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to go take a look at that. The recording and the slides are up on NARF's website. But just understand here for today that you no longer have to go outside the TSP to do a conversion. You can do what's called this in-plan conversion, where you are taking money from the traditional TSP balance, you convert it over to the Roth TSP. And it doesn't matter if you don't have a Roth TSP existing, they will create one for you in this conversion process. Again, keep in mind, it is a taxable event in the year that you do that conversion. The TSP does not allow you to withhold taxes to cover the taxes on that conversion from the conversion dollars themselves, right? So you one or two things. The cleanest way is you have outside funds, outside money to cover those taxes. There's a little gaming that you could do where you could take a subsequent withdrawal and have all of it withheld for taxes to cover it. But then again, you're just layering a taxable conversion or a taxable distribution on top of a taxable conversion. I'll also point out, though, that this is really important for those younger than 59 and a half, right? Because those TSP participants who are active federal employees, they cannot take what's called an in-service withdrawal, right? So the only way that they could convert their TSP money is via this in-plan conversion. Folks older than 59 and a half can do it if they're still working, an in-service withdrawal, or if they've retired, it's just a normal withdrawal. And then they can convert those withdrawals to a Roth IRA. So they have a choice there. But those younger than 59 and a half really do not. All right. So we've talked quite a bit about why you should stay. Let's go over some reasons about why you should leave, or considerations, right, to what makes, why you may want to move some of your money out of the TSP account. We've got a handful of choices here as well. I phrase this as greater withdrawal flexibility. Next slide, I'm going to kind of say that's really not true anymore. Despite the low cost of the TSP funds, there's some pretty low cost funds that you can get outside of the TSP and an IRA as well. We're going to talk about some beneficiary participant concerns. I kind of alluded to that when we talked about the beneficiary participant being able to take penalty-free withdrawals. We're going to talk about a big potential issue for those who are maintaining a beneficiary participant account. IRAs certainly have more investment choice options than the TSP does. You have greater control over your allocations, right? If you have traditional and Roth balances. And if you want to do qualified charitable distributions, which are only an option from IRA accounts. It's not a TSP rule, it's an IRS rule that prevents QCDs from happening within or from a TSP account. So let's talk about greater withdrawal flexibility here first. Go back 1 second here. The first one is I talk about no frequency restrictions. Since the rules have changed tremendously over the past couple of years, this really is no longer an advantage of an IRA account. Again, because I'm gonna kind of shade that one out, right? Because again, we can take single withdrawals out of the TSP account. There's no restrictions to how many we can take or any interval. So I think that's pretty much on par with an IRA now. I would say, however, though, the fact that you can take distributions or withdrawals from an IRA account without needing spousal consent, some people may consider that an advantage. Fund selection control, I think, could be a big advantage, right? When you take a withdrawal from the TSP account, it's done proportionally across the funds that you hold in that TSP account. So for example, let's say you have 20% of your TSP allocated across each of the 5 funds. You take out $10,000, right? $2,000 will come from the C, 2 from the S, 2 from the I, F, G, et cetera, right? So it's proportionally in the way that your TSP is allocated. So in other words, let's say the stock market's down 20, 30%. We're in a bear market and you need to take money out of that TSP account, or you're taking installment payments out of that TSP account. Doesn't matter. You have to sell, in that case, the stock funds when they're down, right? Because you can't control, you can't select and say, hey, you know what? I don't want to take this withdrawal from the CSRI. I just want to take it from the F and the G fund, which have held their value, right? So you can do that in an IRA account. You get the ability to pick and choose what fund to sell to generate the cash for your distribution. So that can be an important consideration for some people. And the no tax withholding option here, right? When you take a distribution from the TSP account and have that paid to you, right? There's a mandatory withdrawal that the TSP has to withhold. And if it's a single withdrawal that's paid directly to you, that's a 20% mandatory withholding, right? Again, that's not a TSP rule, that's an IRS rule, right? So there's going to be some cases where maybe you want to take some money out of a retirement plan and you don't want 20% withheld. Maybe you don't want any taxes withheld, right? My client base is primarily those soon to be retired and retirees. And I have a number of clients who have moved, out of their home into, let's just say, a retirement community. And they need a big chunk of money, as a down payment to go into these retirement communities. And they haven't sold their home yet. And they don't plan to list their home until they make this move. So there's some finagling that we can do, right? We can do these 60-day rollovers out of a retirement plan to kind of get a tax-free loan for 60 days. If we have spouses, we can link those together to get 120 days. And so if it's coming out of an IRA account, I don't want to have tax withheld because it's ultimately not going to be taxable. So I may take some money out of spouse A's account. We've got 60 days to get that back. Within 60 days or toward the end of that period, I take a chunk of money out of spouse B's account, use that to repay spouse A's account. Now I have another 60 days to get money back into spouse B's account, right? And so we don't want to have taxes withheld in that situation. So there's just some more flexibility there for some options. And then state tax withholding. The TSP will not withhold state taxes. Does not mean that it's not taxable, right? Because unless you live in a tax-free state or you live in one of those few states that do not tax TSP distributions, it's a taxable distribution, right? So that means you may have to make estimated tax payments before you file your tax return so that you don't get hit with an underpayment penalty. And at very least, you're going to owe that tax when you file your tax return, okay? So a lot of times it's just easier to have the tax withheld on the front end so you don't have to worry about it later. All right, and then investment choice. I mean, I think this is a clear area where the kind of scale tips in the favor of an IRA account. TSP, we've got the 5 individual funds, we've got the 11 life cycle funds, and yes, I haven't forgot about it. I am aware that they rolled out a few years ago the brokerage window, right? So you do have access to thousands of mutual funds within that brokerage window. However, I don't think it's worth a whole lot, right? Unless you're younger than 59 and a half and cannot take a distribution from the TSP account. Because if you can take a distribution from the TSP account, you would be better off moving some money out and going into an IRA account and investing in those mutual funds in the IRA account. Why? Well, because within that brokerage window are layers of fees on top of the expense of the fund that you're buying, okay? So you just have to be aware of that. By law, that brokerage window cannot cost those who don't use it anymore. So all the people who are using that brokerage window have to absorb all the cost, the administrative cost of that brokerage window. So there's additional fees on top of the expenses of the funds themselves that you invest in. So you can buy all the same funds that are available in that brokerage window in an IRA account without those additional layers of fees. Right? So that's why I say I'm not a huge fan of that brokerage window. Again, the caveat there would be if you're younger than 59 and a half, you don't have the choice of taking a distribution and moving money over to an IRA. Okay, so if you're still working for the federal government, that is. All right, so in an IRA account, I mean, not only can you hold the normal mutual funds or exchange traded funds, but individual stocks, individual bonds, you can hold real estate, you can hold limited partnerships, you can hold cryptocurrencies, annuities, pretty much anything with the exception of a handful that you see on the right-hand side. So lots of investment choice within an IRA account. And if you do your due diligence and you do your research and digging, you can find some pretty darn inexpensive options within the TSP account. Within an IRA account. The key and the starting point is understanding what the TSP funds invest in, right? As I mentioned earlier, all the funds except the G fund are index funds, right? They track broad market index. As an example, the C fund tracks the S&P 500 index, right? So it's 3.5 basis points is what we call, so 0.035%. That's the cost of the C fund. But as you can see here, Fidelity has a S&P 500 index fund. That's less than half the cost. Okay. Vanguard's S&P 500 fund, maybe a little bit more, pretty comparable. And then Schwab's is actually a little bit less as well. So there are funds that are actually less expensive than what you can get in the TSP account. Now, I'm not saying this as an argument, so this is definitively why you should move money out of the TSP account. But I just want to point out that if there are some other reasons that you think are attractive, why you may want to move money or why it may be beneficial to have some money out of the TSP account, keep in mind, you can get a pretty darn good lineup of funds in an IRA account at comparable costs. All right, so we're going to revisit this beneficiary participant thing. I'm going to spend a few slides on it because I think this is very, very important here. So if you are a beneficiary participant currently, please listen up, or if you are a regular participant and your spouse is your primary beneficiary, please pay attention to this too and fill them in, because first thing we need to understand here is that there are 2 types of participants in a TSP account. You have what I'm going to refer to as the TSP participant. Now, this is the original, this is the federal employee who contributed to the TSP account. Okay? They're the owner of that account. All right. Then you have the TSP beneficiary participant. The only person that can be a beneficiary participant is the surviving spouse of the original participant. And that's key. Now, I'll make that clear here in a second, right? So what happens is, again, when a TSP participant passes away and their spouse is the beneficiary, the TSP transfers that deceased's TSP account to a TSP beneficiary participant account. The surviving spouse is now a beneficiary participant maintaining a beneficiary participant TSP account. So I know it's a jumble of words. I apologize, but it's just the way it is. They sound the same, but they're very different. The surviving spouse is actually a beneficiary maintaining an inherited account. They're not really a true owner of that account like the TSP participant was. And the significance here is in the rules that beneficiary participant must follow. Okay. And the first thing I want to get to, and this is kind of like the the most detrimental, the worst outcome I think that could possibly happen is when a original participant dies, goes to the beneficiary participant, and that beneficiary participant passes away. So now we're going down to the beneficiaries of that beneficiary participant. Their only option, we're here at the secondary beneficiary option, right? Their only option that they have is a lump sum distribution. And that lump sum distribution is not eligible to be transferred to an inherited IRA account. All right. So in other words, to the extent that that is taxable money, traditional TSP money, it's 100% taxable in 1 year. Okay? So you can imagine we've got some pretty large TSP balances. If a beneficiary participant dies and they've got $500,000, $1 million in that TSP, that beneficiary participant TSP account, that's a fully taxable distribution going to their beneficiaries. And it doesn't matter if that surviving spouse remarries and names their new spouse as beneficiary to that plan. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's a non-spouse or spousal beneficiary. Their only option is a lump sum distribution. All right. So it's important to understand that because there are some workarounds here, right? Instead of that surviving spouse maintaining a beneficiary participant account, they could transfer it to an IRA account of their own. And at that point in time, it's their own IRA account. The IRS treats them as if that was always their own IRA account. So now they name beneficiaries, say it's non-spouse beneficiaries, their kids, right? That surviving spouse dies. Now their kids have the option to transfer their share to an inherited IRA. In most cases, they'll have 10 years to distribute that money. Way better than 1 single year, right? If that surviving spouse remarried and their new spouse was the beneficiary of that IRA account, now that new spouse inherits it, they can transfer it to an IRA of their own and continue it for their entire lifetime. So way better outcomes than maintaining a beneficiary participant account and dying with that. Okay? Now, there could be an advantage. Let's talk about that for a second. One is I already mentioned earlier on in the presentation that if that surviving spouse were younger than 59 and a half, they can take distributions out of that beneficiary participant account penalty free, right? That's an exception to that 10% early distribution penalty. All right, so that's one advantage. This is, I'm going to talk about RMDs. There could be a pro and a con here. All right, but the rules are different for that surviving spouse who's that beneficiary participant. They're not an owner, as I pointed out, right? They're a beneficiary. So their RMD rules aren't normal, right? It's not based on when they turn 73. They have to start taking distributions, minimum distributions out of that beneficiary participant account when their deceased spouse would have been 73, right? And if they were already 73 and subject to RMDs when they died, then that surviving spouse has to start taking minimum distribution by the year following the year of death, right? And it doesn't matter if that surviving spouse is 60 years old, they're still going to have to take minimum distributions out of that beneficiary participant account if the original TSP participant was subject to RMDs, right? Or the year that they turned RMD age, right? So that's not good, right? In that case, that example, they're going to take distributions out 13 years earlier. Now that rule can actually work in their favor though. Let's pretend now that they're not younger than the deceased, but they're older than the deceased participant. So in this case, we'll reverse. Let's say the surviving spouse is 73 years old, would be subject to RMDs, and the deceased TSP participant was 60. Right? So in this case, the surviving spouse can maintain this beneficiary participant TSP account, and they don't have to take RMDs until the deceased participant would have turned 73. Right? So they get to delay them for potentially 13 more years. And actually, I told you the RMD age increases to 75, so they would get to delay for 15 more years before they are subject to RMDs. All right, so we've got a trade-off though, right? We're trying to delay if we've got a younger spouse who inherited a TSP account, because I've gotten a lot of feedback on this where surviving spouses will say, yeah, but I'm younger. I understand the ramifications. If I die, then it's a taxable lump sum to my kids, but I don't want to take RMDs. I'm older and I can delay these RMDs for a number of years. That is very true, right? But there's a better way to do it than maintaining this beneficiary participant account, right? Instead of keeping the money there in the TSP, that surviving spouse could transfer it out, not to an IRA of their own, but to a beneficiary IRA account. The same RMD rules that apply to this beneficiary participant account apply to a beneficiary IRA. So in that example, that 73-year-old spouse who inherited this TSP account, if they transferred it to an inherited IRA account, they still get to delay RMDs until that deceased participant would have turned 73. Oh, and by the way, what happens if they die with this beneficiary IRA account before they take RMDs? Well, the IRS treats it as if it were their own IRA. In other words, their beneficiaries, if it was their kids, let's just say, they can transfer it to an inherited IRA and take up to 10 years to distribute it. They're not forced into a lump sum distribution. All right, so way better outcomes by transferring it to a beneficiary IRA than keeping it in a beneficiary participant TSP account. All right. I'm sure I'll get a lot of questions on that in the Q&A, so we'll cover it in more detail then if need be. Okay, so another reason why you may want to move some, and it's never all or nothing, by the way. Sometimes these things, require only moving some money out of the TSP account to an IRA account. And this could be one of those examples here, right? So you want to make qualified charitable distributions. So what are QCDs? Well, a QCD is a distribution that's paid directly from an IRA account, and only an IRA. Can't do it from TSPs, can't do it from 401ks or 403bs, only IRAs, right? So it goes from an IRA directly to a charity. All right, so what's the advantage of a QCD? Well, there's twofold, right? First is that if you are subject to RMDs, then every dollar you do as a QCD goes towards satisfying a dollar of the RMD account, of the RMD, right? And that money that is a QCD does not count as income at all, right? So in other words, it's not taxable income coming out, right? That's one of the biggest benefits. And even better than not being taxable, it doesn't even count in your gross income figure. So I've written a lot of articles. I've talked about this in tax planning webinars, right, where a lot of federal retirees get hit by IRMA, the income related monthly adjusted amount. That's that nasty thing that makes your Medicare Part B premiums more expensive, right, based on your income. Well, QCDs don't count as income. So you can use a QCD tactically, maybe to manage, some of those IRMA brackets. Eligibility, you have to be 70 and a half or older, right? While RMD age increased from 70 and a half up to 73, the QCD age stayed at 70 and a half. So that's not a typo. What is a typo, though, that I'm seeing here is that $100,000 per person, it's actually $111,000 per person this year. And so spouses have potential to do $222,000, but they have to have that money in their own IRA account. You can't use one spouse's IRA to do both. So it's a very tax efficient way, especially if you're taking the standard deduction, because you're not getting a tax benefit for your charitable contributions, right? You might give $10,000 to charity. If you take the standard deduction, you didn't get a tax benefit. So this ensures that $10,000, if you send it directly from an IRA to charity, doesn't count as income, right? It doesn't even count as gross income. So it's even better than recognizing income and deducting it. All right. So you have to have some money in an IRA to do a QCD. Again, but it's not all or nothing, right? You just need to have enough money in an IRA account so that your RMD calculation on that IRA equals whatever QCD, whatever charitable contribution that you want to get. Because the biggest bang for your buck is making sure that every dollar of that QCD goes towards satisfying a dollar of your required minimum distribution. All right, so that's one thing why you may want to move some of the money out of the TSP account so that you're eligible to do those QCDs. Another reason, and this is just a limitation with the TSP, and I'll be honest, I was just emailing somebody yesterday, the day before yesterday, on this very topic here. When you have both a traditional balance and a Roth balance in your TSP account, they have to be allocated the same, right? You cannot allocate your traditional balance differently from the Roth balance, right? So some people find that a disadvantage, and I think it is, right? Because when you look at Roth accounts, they're tax-free, right? We want to grow those accounts as much as possible and take advantage of that tax-free growth as much as possible. And most of the people that I run across and work with, that's money that they're not even going to touch, right? They're just going to, hey, I'm going to put it in Roth and I'm just going to pass it on down to my kids, grandkids. And so you might want to invest it more aggressively because you have a longer time horizon for that money than you may with the traditional TSP money, which you have to take minimum distributions out of, right? Which you're probably going to spend or maybe spending more during your lifetime than the Roth accounts. So it certainly is an advantage when you have a Roth IRA, because now we can have our traditional TSP invested one way, maybe a little more conservatively than we have our money in the Roth IRA invested. All right, so the ability to move money from TSP to an IRA affords us the ability to manage these traditional and Roth balances a little bit differently. All right, and I think this is the final reason or potential reason why you may want to leave a TSP, and these aren't applicable to everybody, but certainly this one here. But I've talked to enough NARF members and enough TSP participants to know that there are a bunch of people out there that this does impact. When an RMD is calculated, when it's in the TSP uses what's called the Uniform Lifetime Table, right? That's it's an IRS table, and that's what all TSP owners use. Okay, it's what all IRA owners can use. The Uniform Lifetime Table is actually a form of a joint life expectancy table. It assumes the retirement account owner and their beneficiary, there's a 10-year difference. It assumes their beneficiary is exactly 10 years younger than the account owner. So it takes the joint life expectancy of their two ages to come up with the distribution factor for the RMD. So what happens if your spouse is more than 10 years younger than you, though? Right? Well, you're out of luck if you have the money in the TSP account because they force you to use the uniform table. But outside in an IRA account, the IRS allows you to use what's called the joint life expectancy table, right? And in this table, you actually look up the age and the life expectancy of the IRA owner, and you look up the age and the life expectancy of the beneficiary, and there's the joint life expectancy for the two. That's what that table produces. So if you have a spouse that's more than 10 years younger than you, right, your RMDs, if you have the money in the TSP and been taking RMDs, your RMDs are larger than they would have to be than if you had the money over in an IRA account, right? Some people that's important. Some people it doesn't matter. All right, so let's talk a little bit more in detail about the in-plan conversion kind of versus with Roth IRA conversions. I just keep it a little simple here. I wrote an article on it a couple months ago because there's certainly some reasons and benefits to the in-plan conversion, and there's definitely some reasons and benefits to doing a conversion out to a Roth IRA account. As I mentioned, the very first one, right, we just talked about that. You have to have the same allocation for the traditional and the Roth balances, right? A lot of people want to manage those allocations differently because there are different goals and objectives for those balances. Within the TSP account, again, you're restricted to the TSP fund lineup. In a Roth IRA, right, you've got a huge investment universe to choose from. The third bullet point, I think, is an important one that a lot of people don't understand. And this is when you take a withdrawal from the Roth TSP, those distributions come proportionately from the three potential sources of funds you have in that Roth TSP. And those sources can be Roth contributions, they can be now in-plan conversion dollars, and the earnings on those contributions and conversion dollars, right? So those are the three potential sources you can have in a Roth TSP account. So when you take a distribution, they come proportionally from all three. So for example, we've got $90,000 in the Roth TSP. I'm a little slow, so I'm going to make equally here, right? We've got a third, a third, a third. So we've got 30,000 of contributions, 30,000 of conversion dollars, and $30,000 of earnings. So when we take a distribution, let's say we take $30,000 out, 10,000 comes from contributions, 10 from conversion dollars, and 10 from earnings. Now, it doesn't sound like an issue, but it can be an issue, especially when you compare it to the way Roth IRA distributions are handled. With a Roth IRA, the IRS specifically says contribution dollars come out first, then conversion dollars, and the last thing that come out is earnings. And this is important because in order for those earnings to be tax-free, right, you have to have what's called a qualified withdrawal. You've got to be older than 59 and a half, and you have to have that Roth account open for at least 5 years. Meet those two requirements, you have a qualified withdrawal, your earnings come out tax-free. By the way, your contributions will always come out tax-free because you paid taxes on that money already. Your conversion dollars will always come out tax-free. However, they may be subject to a 10% early distribution penalty if you convert it and distribute those dollars before 5 years has passed, right? It's a separate 5-year rule than the 5-year rule for a qualified withdrawal, right? So it is possible to get money out of a Roth IRA before you're 59.5 tax and penalty free. Because again, let's go back to that example. I've got $90,000 in a Roth IRA, 30 of it's contributions, 30 of it's conversion dollars, and 30 of it is earnings. I can take $30,000 out completely tax and penalty free because the IRS is going to consider that to come from 100% from my contributions, right? After that, the next $30,000 that comes out is going to be from my conversion dollars. And if they've been converted for at least 5 years, they're all coming out tax and penalty free. Okay, so Roth IRAs give a little bit more flexibility when you need the money before those time requirements. Okay, and I've been in several situations where we've done we set up a systematic conversion plan for clients to get money out. Again, it happens to be a lot of times it's a big life retirement event. I mean, they need this big down payment for a retirement home, and maybe all their money is in traditional TSP, for example. And we might do a series of conversions. So we're being taxed on a portion each year leading up to that retirement community deposit. You know, so maybe we do it 4 years and then you need the money. Well, Roth IRA, I've got no problem, right? Because I can convert for 4 years and can take all those conversion dollars out, tax and penalty free, because once I reach 59.5, there's no penalty on that money, where I could not do that in a Roth TSP. So there's some nuances in there that you may want to pay attention to. And this next one, the 90-day forced lump sum, that's really not specific to the in-plan conversion. That's in general to the TSP account. And I just want to point this out because I ran into this exact issue talking to a TSP participant. She inherited some money from a TSP participant, and she's very smart and astute, but you know, they were not married, they were lifetime partners. And you know, when somebody that you love dies, you know, it's hard, right? And you're not thinking clearly. And so even though she knew the rule, she let this 90-day timeline slip and go past. And then lo and behold, a couple of weeks after that 90-day period, she received a check for about $370,000. And that was the amount left over after the mandatory 20% withholding. And that's not the end of the story, because obviously there's other income that stacks on top of. So tax rate's much higher than 20%. And then she will owe state taxes on it as well. So this is kind of more of a public service announcement here, just making sure that your beneficiaries understand that they have to act within 90 days. Otherwise, the TSP pushes out a forced lump sum distribution, and that is not an eligible distribution to be rolled over to an inherited IRA account. In the pro column for the in-plan, right, we talked about low cost, not necessarily the lowest cost, but I'll say low cost, and definitely, you know, credit protection. You know, Roth IRAs may be more flexibility, cost vary. Again, I think you can get some pretty low cost options in a Roth IRA. So when we look at this, you know, it really comes down to your goals and objectives, which is going to be better. You know, people who want simplicity, which I'm a big believer in, it's very easy and convenient to do the in-plan conversion, but folks maybe want to be a little more tactical with their allocations. That kind of tips the scale in favor of a Roth IRA conversion. Again, younger than 59.5, you know, your only option is to do an in-plan conversion if all of your money is traditional TSP, because you don't have the ability to do an in-service withdrawal. So anyway, so those are some pros and cons on that. Again, I did write an article, I think came out, I can't remember if it was June, July, August issue. So, but I go a little bit more detail there. So let's assume that you do want to move some of your money out of TSP account at least. Well, how do you do that? What are your options? Right. Well, your options are going to be primarily, if you want to have all the control, what we're talking about today is moving over to an IRA account, whether that's a traditional IRA account or whether that's a Roth IRA account. And a lot of financial institutions offer IRAs. You can pick one of the big brokerage firms like Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, E-Trade. Actually, trades hanging around. I think they've been purchased, but there's a lot of custodians out there, right? Banks, credit unions offer IRAs and Roth IRAs. Typically, you're going to be restricted to banking products, so like whether it's savings accounts or CDs. Whereas if you go to a brokerage or mutual fund company, you've got a lot more investment choices. But fees vary widely, rules vary widely. So I always like to say, buyer beware, which we'll talk about later. But in the actual process of moving money from the TSP to an IRA account, there's two ways to do it. You can do it via indirect rollover or a direct rollover. You primarily just want to focus on that direct rollover, unless you're trying to do some special maneuvering here. An indirect rollover is where you receive the funds first, right? The TSP distribution is paid to you, okay? And again, as I mentioned earlier, in that case, there is a mandatory 20% withholding, right? So if you take $100,000 out, have it paid to you because you want to move it over to your IRA account, you're going to receive a check for $80,000. The other $20,000 went to the IRS, okay? So you now have 60 days to get that $80,000. Plus, if you want to roll over the entire 100, you've got to come up with another 20,000 from somewhere so that you could roll over the entire $100,000 into an IRA account, right? And if you're going from traditional TSP to a traditional IRA, whatever ends up in that IRA will be non-taxable if it's done within 60 days, right? But any amount not deposited into that IRA, including that withholding that the TSP did, will be taxable. So for example, you did a $100,000 distribution, you got a check for 80, the other 20 went to the IRS. And if you only deposit 80 back into that IRA account, that 20,000 that went to tax withholding is going to be a taxable distribution. So by far, in 99% of the cases, the better way to do this is going to be a direct rollover. And that's, instead of having that distribution paid directly to you, you tell the TSP to pay it directly to your IRA custodian, okay? And again, here, I'll point out there's going to be a 7-day hold. So, be aware of this, right? So if you don't have your IRA custodian set up as a financial institution on your TSP account, and you do that, they make you wait 7 days before you can get that money processed and moved over, okay? But in this case, no taxes will be withheld, because if it's going from traditional TSP to traditional IRA, that's a non-taxable event, non-taxable transfer. So you can tell them to not withhold taxes. It's definitely a simpler process. There's fewer complications and rules to watch out for. Now, you could go directly from the traditional TSP. I didn't point this out over on this slide here, right, where I said traditional TSP to traditional IRA and Roth to Roth. But I could put a third one where it says traditional TSP to Roth IRA, right? And in that case, that's going to be a taxable conversion, as we talked about, right? So you can have the TSP withhold taxes if you want, unlike an in-plan conversion. So you could have the TSP withhold taxes or not. Okay? And if you don't have taxes withheld, you just need to make estimated tax payments. All right, so that's how you get money from the TSP to an IRA account and the type of account that you get it to. All right, buyer beware, and this is just again, kind of an announcement, just say, hey, make sure you read the fine print, because not all IRA custodians are created equal. If you're dealing with the big guys, Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, there's a lot of competition there. So they're very, very similar in terms of fees and expenses and their rules. But, beneficiary rules can vary custodian to custodian. So understand what the beneficiary options are, even what your beneficiaries can do with the money. Some won't allow it to be moved out from them. Most of them will. So just understand the rules for which, with the custodian that you're dealing with here. And obviously, if you're working with an advisor, right, depends on your relationship or your working relationship with that advisor. Are you charging fee for service for just planning? Are you going to charge a management fee for assets that they manage? Some advisors, were like stockbrokers, where they're going to charge a commission on products that they sell to you. Some don't charge up front, but have a back-end sales charge. So just understand, your custodian, understand the products that somebody is recommending to you. And this just kind of sums it up, right? When you're just saying, well, what's some of these key decision factors? It really comes down to goals, objectives, your circumstances. Do you value protection, civil protection or not? Or do we, do you have a $3, $4, $5 million umbrella liability policy and that's not that big of a concern for you? Do you want to maximize the tax benefit on your charitable contributions if you're charitably inclined? Well, QCDs could be a way to do that, and maybe moving money to an IRA makes sense. Estate planning, these beneficiary rules that I talked about, and I go into more beneficiary rules and the nuances of the TSP beneficiary rules in my estate planning webinar, which I'll be doing in December. Later on this year, I'll be at FedCon. I'll be presenting it there as well. But there's certain reasons why an IRA may be attractive, and there's definitely reasons why the TSP is more attractive. So everybody's unique and their circumstances and goals are unique, and it's never a one-size-fits-all solution. So with that said, I want to thank everybody. Just let you know, we are a full-service financial planning and investment advisory firm, right? And so we offer a federal retirement boot camp that we go take our clients methodically through this process, this series of meetings, to let them understand all their goals and objectives and all the options and benefits that they have available to them so that they can make some smart choices here. So we give some discounts to NARF members. So if that is of interest, you can reach out to us. And that is it. I appreciate everybody's time. And just, again, let everybody know, we will be following this up with a 60-minute Q&A session. So I'm going to do my best to answer as many questions as I possibly can. So we'll get started on that. And Ellie, is there anything that you wanted to add or that I missed?
No, you're perfect. The questions have started rolling in.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to stop video. So I'm going to take these questions one at a time here. Somebody says, I emailed a question. Do you see them? Well, I have not had an opportunity to check my email as I've been presenting, so I will do that later. And I will email you later, Brenda, make sure I did. First question, are slides available for download? Yes, they will be posted along with the full recording of this webinar probably sometime tomorrow. So it says, for the webinar team, you referenced a couple of previous presentations articles. When the recording is posted, would you please include links to these? So when you log in, Emma, to NARF's website, and you go to the Federal Benefits member section, there's going to be Federal Benefits Institute. You can see webinars, and all the webinars are going to be listed there for you to view. So the full suite of them has been archived. Says regular beneficiaries can convert to inherited IRAs. So again, so we go back to we've got a TSP participant, and we have potentially their surviving spouse if they're married, right? And participant dies, money goes to the beneficiary participant automatically. It's the beneficiary participant. When that person dies, their beneficiaries have no option to go to an inherited IRA. A regular beneficiary, so let's say now the beneficiary of the TSP participant, right? Whether it's spouse or non-spouse, they'll have the option to move that money to an inherited IRA. It's not a forced lump sum distribution. Is it automatic for the participant TSP to transfer to a beneficial participant upon death of the Yes, it is. So once that TSP participant passes away, if their spouse was a beneficiary, the TSP will automatically set up a beneficiary participant account, transfer the money over there, and then the surviving spouse is now the beneficiary participant. They have full control over that account, right? So again, they're not technically in the IRS's eyes an owner. They're a beneficiary maintaining an inherited account. It's a little bit different rules. But they have full control in terms of distributions, investment allocation. As I mentioned, they could transfer it to an IRA of their own, or if it makes sense, an inherited IRA. And then, by the way, I didn't mention this. When that surviving spouse transfers it to an inherited IRA, in that example I gave, they may want to do that because they could delay required minimum distributions. When that deceased participant would have turned RMD age, that surviving spouse now has to start RMDs. At that point, the best thing to do would be to transfer that inherited IRA to an IRA of their own. A spouse is given a lot of flexibility and a lot of control over what they can do. if my spouse dies, can I transfer the beneficiary TSP into my own TSP account since we both have TSP accounts? Yeah, that's a great question, and I should have addressed that. The answer to that, Virginia, is yes, you can. So if you're both federal employees, you both have TSPs, you're both participants of your own TSP account, and one of you passes away, same thing's going to happen still. The TSP will automatically transfer it to a beneficiary participant TSP account, but then the surviving spouse absolutely, yes, can transfer that beneficiary TSP account to their own TSP account. Does the 90-day inherited rule forced lump sum apply to the regular TSP in addition? Yes, I pointed that out, Andrea. So it wasn't specific. It just happened to show up there if it's not specific to the Roth. But yes, so when a TSP participant passes away, right? If it's a spouse, no big deal, because again, the TSP is going to automatically move the money over to a beneficiary participant account. But if the TSP participant's beneficiary is a non-spouse, that non-spouse beneficiary has 90 days. Doesn't matter if it's traditional or Roth. They have 90 days to make an election to move that money over to an inherited IRA or inherited Roth IRA. And if they do not meet that 90-day requirement, they will get a check in the mail. I turned 73 in January. Will the TSP provide any information regarding the RMD amount and withdrawal options? Barry, yes, they will. So next year, I'm assuming you turn 73 in January of 2027. So you will get communications from the TSP telling you that you are subject to a minimum distribution and letting you know what that required minimum distribution amount is. They will calculate it for you. They will even, if you don't elect a distribution, they will even push that RMD amount out automatically for you so you do not miss the deadlines because there's some steep penalties. Now, I will point out your first RMD and your first RMD only can be delayed up until April 1st following the year you turn 73. So if you turn 73 in 2027, what's called the required beginning date is April 1st of 2028. So you could potentially delay your 2027 RMD into 2028. Now, the TSP, if you don't elect an option, they will automatically kick it out in March of 2028. They won't let it go past that. They don't want you to miss a deadline. But what that means is you have to take 2 RMDs in 2028 because you're not avoiding or skipping the 2027 RMD. You're just kind of kicking that can down the road and delaying it into 2028. So you're taking 2027's RMD in 2028, and then you'll also be forced to take 2028's RMD by December 31st of that year. When did the TSP 55 and over 10% tax exemption rule for withdrawals go into effect? I'm eligible for it if it went into effect after my retirement date. It's been around for as long as I can remember. What they just recently changed, they recently enhanced it to add the age 50 exemption for public safety officers, and then even more recently than that, extended it to that, if you have at least 25 years of TSP eligible service, you're also eligible for that exemption as well. So as long as you retired, if you're just kind of like, we'll just call it a normal federal employee, not a public safety officer, as long as you retired in the year or after the year you turn 55, then you're eligible for that 10% exemption. If you move some of the TSP to an IRA, can you have the RMD come only from the IRA and none from the TSP? That's a great question. Unfortunately, the answer is no, right? So when you're dealing with an employer plan like a TSP or 401ks, 403bs, you have to take the RMD from each individual employer plan you have. So if you have a TSP account, let's say you've had a few jobs and you've got a couple 401ks from previous employers, you have to take a separate RMD from each one of those employer plans. The RMDs you take from those employer plans cannot be used to satisfy other employer plan RMDs, nor can they be used to satisfy an IRA RMD. And then if you have an IRA in addition to an employer plan, you have to take an RMD from your IRA account as well. And you cannot take money from the IRA to satisfy your TSP or any other employer RMD. Can a secondary beneficiary, not the spouse, transfer their share to an inherited IRA with the 90-day window to prevent the lump sum distribution? If we're talking secondary beneficiaries, right? So that means we've got an inherited TSP situation, right? We've got the TSP participant died. The surviving spouse's beneficiary now is maintaining that beneficiary participant account. They name beneficiaries who are now the secondary beneficiaries. And the answer is no, absolutely not, right? That was that whole slide, is that a beneficiary participant's beneficiaries have to take a lump sum distribution, and it cannot be transferred to an inherited IRA. That's the big negative consequence. What happens when an unmarried divorced TSP participant dies and their child inherits the account? So here we have the TSP participant, right? So forget about all that stuff about a beneficiary participant. We're talking about the participant, right? And so their beneficiaries, if it's a non-spouse, they have the ability to transfer their share to an inherited IRA, right? A non-spouse beneficiary cannot maintain a TSP account, right? So they'll have 90 days to elect to have that money distributed and transferred over to an inherited IRA. If they don't, then again, they're going to get a check. And if it's traditional money, it's all taxable. Is there any indication that the TSP will allow change to allow fund withdrawal control? I haven't seen anything. I know it's something that's a lot of TSP participants, NARF members have been advocating for and want. That, as well as being able to have different allocations for Roth and traditional money. I have not seen, I haven't come across any 401k accounts that allow participants to specifically, sell funds for distributions. So I don't know. I haven't seen anything, and my guess is it'd be a long time before that comes up. I think it's a big administrative challenge, I think. So you're always balancing flexibility, benefits, and cost. For a transfer from a non-Roth TSP, okay, so we'll call that traditional TSP, to a non-Roth IRA, we'll call that traditional IRA, where the check is mailed to you but made out to the IRA company, Schwab, Fidelity, et cetera, is tax withheld. In most cases, no, right? So you actually, when you request that withdrawal, you would typically, no tax is going to be withheld because it's a tax-free transfer. The only time tax would be mandatory withheld from that type of transfer is if you are RMD, subject to RMDs, in which case an RMD cannot be transferred from a traditional TSP to a traditional IRA, right? By law, the TSP has to distribute that RMD to you first, in which case there will be mandatory withholding on that portion, but then the rest that goes over to the IRA account, there will be no tax withholding on that. You mentioned I had one check get lost going from the TSP to a company, so I was looking at this option. Yeah, so I mean, I'm assuming hopefully you've been working with the TSP, notify them that that's a lost check so they can cancel and then reissue. And by the way, for anybody listening and going, well, why would they ever cut a check to do a transfer? That is the only way they do it. When you move money from the TSP to an IRA account, as crazy as it sounds, they cut checks payable to the IRA custodian. It's the way it is. What I would suggest is that, depends. If you're working with an advisor, you can have the check mailed to the advisor so they can track it. But if you're self-directing the IRA account, you could consider having that check mailed to you, so you're kind of controlling the paper trail and knowing that you got it. And then some custodians have local offices that you could hand deliver it to. So please address bringing money from a traditional IRA into the TSP. I read an article in NARF magazine about leaving basis in a traditional IRA. I also read TSP site info about bringing traditional IRA dollars into TSP that I think advised one cannot bring basis dollars. Yeah, I mean, I maybe the article that I've written, I've talked about isolating basis, which, try not to go down a rabbit hole here. Basis is created with non-deductible contributions. Right. So a lot of people contribute to an IRA account, but when their income is above certain thresholds, they cannot deduct that traditional IRA contribution. So they're paying tax on that money going into the traditional IRA. right? So that non-deductible contribution creates basis in an IRA account. Technically, right, if you didn't know any better, right, you can absolutely transfer 100% of that IRA, including the basis, to the TSP, but you just lost the tax character of that basis. So in other words, you're going to be taxed on that money twice. You're taxed on it at the time you earned it, because again, you did not deduct it when it went into the IRA, and then you're going to be taxed on it again when it gets distributed from the TSP account. So it's up to the IRA owner to track basis. It's up to the IRA owner to know that the TSP cannot hold basis, right? So in that case, if let's say you have a $100,000 IRA account and 20,000 of it is non-deductible contributions, in other words, your basis, you would want to work with the TSP to transfer over 80,000 from the IRA to the TSP. The 20,000 that remains in the traditional IRA now is all basis. It's all money that's been taxed. And the cool thing you can do now is you can convert that 20,000 from the traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. And because that money's already been taxed, that entire conversion of $20,000 will be non-taxable. I can't remember when I wrote that article. If you email, I can tell you. But yeah, so I talked about that as a strategy. So anybody out there who's made non-deductible contributions to a traditional IRA account, the downside is that all the earnings on those non-deductible contributions are growing in that tax-deferred retirement account, right? In other words, they'll be taxed when it comes out. The money, if you do it correctly, that you already pay tax on the basis as you take distributions will not be taxable. Every distribution you take, it comes proportionally from your basis and from the pre-tax money. But the better way to do that is to isolate that basis, get it converted over to a Roth IRA tax-free. So now all the earnings on that money is growing tax-free in the Roth IRA instead. So Joel, if you talk with the TSP, they've got a good concierge team. And if you let them know that you want to transfer money from a traditional IRA into your TSP account, they'll guide you step by step along the way. Just keep in mind, if you've got basis, you want to leave that behind in the traditional IRA account. Yeah, that's a good point here, Dan. So it's another advantage of moving some amount of funds outside the TSP to a brokerage for growth purposes is the TSP's limit of 2 intra-fund transfers a month. So after 2, you can only move money to the G fund. So yeah, so for those who are really active in trading their accounts, that can definitely be an advantage to having some money over in an IRA account, because there's no limit in the amount that you can trade. What qualifies as a precious metal? Gold, silver. My sister is a beneficiary on my TSP account. When I die, what exactly does she have to do to avoid the 90-day lump sum distribution? So she just needs to make sure she elects to have, my recommendation, not take a lump sum distribution, but elect to have that TSP account transferred to an inherited IRA account. So you pass away, TSP is going to notify her, or she'll likely know you passed away. So she notifies the TSP that you've passed away. And they'll tell her, well, you're the beneficiary and you have 90 days to make an election. So she'll want to open up an inherited IRA with a custodian and then file the necessary paperwork with the TSP to get that money transferred directly into that inherited IRA account. And then from there, she has full control of that inherited IRA, take distributions from that. I believe you stated that for a non-spousal beneficiary for TSP, once TSP owner dies, beneficiary owes taxes for 100% of TSP within 1 year. Did I understand that correctly? That moving the funds to an IRA would not have the same requirement upon death of an IRA owner. Again, so what I was specifically saying was that was when a beneficiary participant dies, right? So a beneficiary participant can only be the surviving spouse of the original participant. So that's what I was talking about. The original participant dies, TSP moves it over to a beneficiary participant account. The surviving spouse maintaining that beneficiary participant account dies. His or her beneficiary's only option at that point is a lump sum distribution. So to avoid that beneficiary participant could do one of two things: transfer it to an IRA account of their own, or transfer it over to an inherited IRA if that made sense. You'd have to go back and listen to the webinar to go through the examples of when that may make sense. Our direct rollover is done electronically. I like to transfer some of my TSP balance to Vanguard. Now, Paul, so again, it doesn't matter if it's a direct or indirect rollover. The TSP cuts checks in both cases. The only difference is indirect rollover, check is made payable to you, the TSP participant. A direct rollover, the check is going to be made payable to the IRA custodian. But in both cases, yeah, crazy as it seems, it goes by check. I've only come across now two companies, two 401k providers that actually wired funds when they do a rollover. Everybody else, so it's not, the TSP is not the anomaly here. Just about every other 401k employer plan provider does this by check. Can you roll over a portion of your TSP funds to an IRA? And then if you are not happy, can roll it back over to the TSP? That's a great question. And excuse me, sorry, take a sip of water. As long as you have at least $200 in the TSP account, the TSP will keep it open. All right, if the balance falls below 200, they'll cash you out there. So as long as you have an active TSP account that is open, absolutely, you can roll money, do a reverse rollover, so to speak, right? Take money from a traditional IRA and move it back into the TSP account. What you cannot do is move a Roth IRA into the Roth TSP. They do not allow that. You can move like money from a Roth 401k into the Roth TSP. So in other words, a Roth account in another employer plan, you can move that to a Roth TSP, but you cannot move a Roth IRA into the TSP account. But you absolutely can move a traditional IRA into the TSP. Even like SEP IRAs, you can as well. So if we make a TSP in-plan conversion to a Roth TSP, and as I retire, pass away, can my beneficiary spouse keep the Roth TSP and she maintain the Roth TSP for her lifetime? Yes. However, it will be subject to required distribution rules. When a spouse maintains a beneficiary participant account, that beneficiary participant account, doesn't matter if it's traditional or Roth, will be subject to required minimum distribution rules. Again, that's going to be the later of when the original TSP participant would have turned RMD age, say 73, or if they were already RMD age the year following the year of death. So that would be another reason why they would want to move at least that Roth money over to a Roth IRA of their own, because then it would not be subject to required minimum distributions. Now, be clear, because I know people might be thinking the normal Roth TSP. So if you're a normal regular TSP participant and have a Roth TSP account, that money is not subject to RMDs anymore. Only if it's a spouse maintaining a beneficiary participant account. Again, which that's the beneficiary participant is not an owner. They're a beneficiary maintaining this account. So different rules than owners abide by. I recently withdrew money from my G fund, but they took equal percentage of the CIS funds. How do I withdraw that? Well, John, that's what I was telling you. If you took a withdrawal, right, and we're talking about a withdrawal paid to you, you have no choice in the matter. All withdrawals come proportionately between the funds and what you hold, right? If you're talking about inter-fund transfers, now it's different. You can selectively move money from one fund to another within the TSP account. But if we're talking withdrawals, you cannot pick and choose what fund you want the money to come from. Can the QCD exceed RMD for tax purposes? Yeah, absolutely it can. You know, up to that, again, the maximum QCD per person this year is 111,000, right? So if your RMD is 50 grand, you can still do the 111,000, right? When I said though, the biggest bang for your buck is making sure that 100% of your QCD goes towards satisfying your RMD. I was really referring to when your QCDs are smaller than your RMD, right? If your RMD is $25,000, you're doing a $10,000 QCD, 100% of that 10,000 is going towards satisfying that 25,000. So in other words, you only have $15,000 of RMD, taxable RMD left in that example. If you have listed beneficiaries, for example, your family members, would the money still go to your spouse only? No. My example is when your spouse is beneficiary, right? So, and if you've got multiple beneficiaries listed, so let's say you have your spouse and other people listed as primary beneficiary, along with your spouse, only your spouse's share is going to be transferred to that beneficiary participant account. Those other folks will have to elect what they want to do with it. They can take a lump sum distribution, or they can transfer it to an inherited IRA. Can the TSP beneficiary be listed as a trust under the last will and testament of the principal? What would be the tax consequences? Well, boy, you're going down a rabbit hole there. First of all, the answer to your question is yes, right? If you have a testamentary trust, there's going to be a wording for how to name that trust and how to list that as a beneficiary on your TSP account. So yes, you can do that. But when you name a trust as beneficiary, that's way beyond the scope of this presentation. May touch some of that on, I think I touched a little bit on that my last estate planning webinar, but and it's been a while since I've written articles, but there's you introduce a lot of complications. Let's put it this way: when you name a trust as beneficiary to a retirement plan. Not to say that you shouldn't do it or can't do it. There's very valid reasons to do it, but you just have to understand what you're doing. You've got to make sure everything is drafted properly, and to make sure the outcome is what you want it to be. Do you have advice on how to set up people of interest to receive monies from the TSP, and also if there is a will or living trust? Well, a will and a living trust would be something you draft for you personally. It doesn't have anything to do with the TSP unless you named, your estate or a living trust as beneficiary to your TSP. And if you want people to receive some of your TSP, you can name anybody your TSP beneficiary, right? They don't have to be related to you. You can name individuals, you can name charities, you can name family members, non-family members. So you've got a lot of latitude on who you can name as beneficiary. With regard to the beneficiary for TSP, I'm not married and have my daughter designated as the beneficiary. If I heard you correctly, she will only get the lump sum option if I should pass away and not be able to use a TSP, correct? Again, all that negative stuff I was talking about was when a beneficiary participant died, not the TSP participant. You, Sue, are a TSP participant. I'm assuming here, actually, you didn't give me that detail. You said you're not married, but you have a daughter. So I'm assuming that the TSP account is yours. You were the one who contributed to it. You're the federal employee, right, who contributed to that TSP account, in which case you are the TSP participant. And when you die, your daughter, she has two choices. She can take a lump sum distribution, which would be taxable, or she would have the ability to transfer to an inherited IRA. If you are maintaining a beneficiary participant account, let's say your spouse passed away, and now you were not the original TSP participant, in other words, so you're a surviving spouse maintaining a beneficiary participant account and have your daughter designated as beneficiary. In that case, her only option is a lump sum taxable distribution. I know it gets, I've explained this and tried to figure out what's the best way to explain the difference between TSP participant and beneficiary participant to make this clear. And it's a difficult topic and confusing because they sound so similar, but there's definitely distinct differences. So it's something you guys need to look into. Do TSP and IRA RMD requirements get calculated and satisfied separately? I think I covered this earlier. The answer to that is yes. So you have to satisfy an IRA RMD by itself and a TSP RMD by itself. And then if so, the TSP RMD cannot be satisfied by QCD, and that is correct. Yes, you cannot do a QCD from the TSP, only from IRAs. I will be 73 next November. I have 400,000 in TSP, mostly in non-Roth. Again, we'll call that traditional, but put some money in Roth TSP each year when it became available. Right, so that's for contributions. What are your thoughts on converting a large proportion of the non-Roth to Roth? Beyond the scope of this presentation, I am a proponent of Roth conversions. I will say that much. I'm a proponent of Roth conversions when the circumstances are correct. And basically, when you can do a conversion at the same or lower tax rate than that money would otherwise be taxed at if you did not do a conversion, right? So I did a Roth conversion webinar earlier this year. I think it was March or April. It is archived on NARF's website, so take a look at that. And if you happen to be at FedCon this year, I'll also be presenting a Roth conversion presentation live at FedCon. For a TSP direct IRA rollover, is the TSP investments, for example, C fund, liquidated first and then the cash transferred to the rollover IRA? Yeah, I don't know. Yes, it is. They've got to liquidate the funds to raise the cash to send over to the IRA account. So probably what you're getting at maybe is there's going to be a period of time where that money is out of the market. And yes, that is absolutely true. So they sell the C fund in your example, check is cut, issued, mailed out. It's received by the IRA custodian, redeposit it, and then invest it however you direct them to. So there is going to be a period of time where it is out of the market. So what about doing a combination of keeping some money in the TSP and some in a separate account? And if so, which TSP funds do you recommend that are best to keep? I know there really are no counterpart to the G fund for its overall balance of risk reward, but the I fund is somewhat limited in its overall coverage of international markets. I mean, that is investor participant choice there. I've seen cases where people keep money in the TSP. They love the G fund for the stability and the consistency of it. So they've got the TSP 100% invested in the G fund, but they've invested their equity portion in an IRA in a mix of assets. I've seen people just specifically, and it's not as much an issue now. You mentioned the I fund, somewhat limited. It's way more broadly invested now than it was a year and a half ago. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the I fund used to be only developed markets, right? Developed countries. It now is inclusive of emerging economies as well, except for China and Hong Kong. All right. So you are getting emerging market exposure in the I fund. But let's just say you want money in China. Well, then you can move some money out of the TSP to an IRA and invest in a China fund. Or whatever, maybe it's real estate that you want to invest in, right? So, or whatever asset class that you want to invest in, maybe that you cannot get in the TSP account, that's what the IRA is good for. How is the RMD determined? So you take the prior year's ending balance and you divide it by the life expectancy factor according to the lifetime table. So, so for RMDs, 2026 RMDs, they're based on December 31st, 2025's values. And then the factor that's used that balance is divided by just depends on their age and the uniform lifetime table. If you Google uniform lifetime table, one of the top hits is going to be Fidelity, and the uniform lifetime table within that, they show you the calculation. I'm widowed, so my TSP beneficiaries are my non-spouse relatives. Is it correct that if I die before age 73, my beneficiaries can wait to take the RMD? No, that's only for a beneficiary participant who inherited a TSP from their spouse, right? So if your TSP account, let's say, was a beneficiary, if you inherited it from your spouse, then your RMDs would have started the year your spouse turned 73 under current rule. But in their case, what's going to happen is if you're the TSP participant, right, and your non-spouse relatives are beneficiaries, you pass away, they can transfer it to an inherited IRA. And in most cases, they're going to, if you're at least, it's correct that if I die before age 73, so you're not 73 yet. So if you die before 73 and they inherit it, they will have 10 years to distribute that money, and they will not have to take RMDs. It depends on the type of money too, Roth versus traditional. But you're confusing what I was talking about, explaining what a beneficiary, a spouse inherited from the TSP account from the participant, and then was maintaining a beneficiary participant account. That's where I was talking about they can delay RMDs based on the TSP participant's age. I have heard that the G fund offers a treasury bond rate higher than what's available in the private sector. Is this the case? And if so, would that be a reason to stay in the TSP for a conservative investor? Sure. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, this TSP's, the G fund's a little bit unique, right? It's tied to kind of intermediate long-term treasury rates. And you know, so you get a yield kind of equal to or around what these intermediate longer term treasury rates are yielding, but you have no volatility, right? When you own a bond and interest rates go up, the price of that bond goes down. So you don't have to worry about that G fund. So it's saying a lot of people really like the G fund. They're conservative, and that would be a reason to stay in the TSP. Absolutely. Is it a percent of your TSP balance? That was the only question. I think that was a follow-up to the RMD. It's not technically a percentage. Yeah, you're dividing the balance by a life expectancy factor. You can convert it to a percentage if you want to look at it that way. You just take 1 and divide it by the life expectancy factor, and that will give you the percentage that you have to take out each year. How soon can you transfer a Roth conversion TSP to a Roth outside? There is no time restraints, and this is actually a great thing. You know, I was talking about before the differences in distribution rules from Roth TSP and Roth IRAs, right? Where Roth TSP is proportional between the sources of funds in the Roth TSP, whereas a Roth IRA, it's contributions first, conversion dollar second, and earnings last. So if you did a conversion and you need access to that money before that 5-year requirement, that 5-year clock, 5 years from the date of that conversion takes place, you could transfer that money over to a Roth IRA. Well, that muddied it up a little bit. If you have let's say you have contributions and conversions and earnings, you could transfer the money over to a Roth IRA, and conceivably in that case, then take out just the contribution amounts, penalty and tax free. You still cannot touch the conversion dollars until 5 years have passed. And by the way, I think I don't know if it's come out yet, but I just wrote an article on the 5-year rule for conversions because a lot of people get this wrong. That 5-year rule pertaining to conversions only matters if you're younger than 59 and a half. Okay, so anybody who does a conversion and either after they're 59 and a half or they did conversion and then they subsequently reach age 59 and a half, that 5-year rule that applies to each conversion no longer matters. My TSP is all traditional, not Roth. My beneficiaries are charitable organizations. I will make QCDs out of my IRA starting at 70 and a half, but save the big donations for after I know I don't need the money. My other beneficiaries will inherit out of previously taxed accounts. What potential glitches could occur with this plan? That's a great setup right there. And this is something I talk about with estate planning, kind of tax planning. There's certain types of money are better suited to go to charity, and certain types of money are better suited to go to individuals. And what you did is great, right? In other words, traditional IRAs, traditional TSP money, right? That money passes to an individual beneficiary. let's just say it's worth 70 cents on the dollar, right? Because 30% of it goes to state and federal taxes. It's obviously varies. It's different for everybody, but it's arguments they say that. So if you pass traditional tax deferred money to an individual, they'll ultimately get about 70 cents on the dollar. However, if that money goes to charity, charities don't pay tax on the money, right? So every dollar is worth $1 to them. So if you've got traditional IRA, or let's just call it traditional tax deferred money, which would be traditional TSP, traditional IRA, and you have taxable money, non-retirement account money, and you want some money to go to charity, you want some money to go to individuals, the best money to give to the individuals would be that non-retirement account money. Because again, they're going to get that money and it will be non-taxable to them, right? Even if you have it in investments, let's say you bought Apple stock at $10 a share and it's worth $150 a share. So you've got this huge gain in Apple stock if you sold it. When you pass away, there's a step up in cost basis to the fair market value at the date of death. So whatever the value of that stock is when you die, that is your beneficiary's basis now. So they could sell it and have little to no tax consequence. So that's why that's the best money to pass to beneficiaries. If you have Roth money, that ideally goes to individuals as well because it's non-taxable. Most non-spouse beneficiaries will get another 10 years of tax-free growth if they want it. So in your case, Julie, I think what you set up there, I think is great. I like the idea of keeping some money back just in case, making sure you don't need it. But it sounds like you're in a financially, you're in a great position here to where you can make these QCD donations, and that helps from a tax perspective, helps with IRMA, right? Keeps your adjusted gross income lower. So you can do a lot of good things by using that strategy. Other than that, I would have to really take a look at a lot more details to be able to impart any other more specific advice or thoughts or opinions. Can a non-spouse beneficiary be a beneficiary participant? Nope, they cannot. As I mentioned, right, only a spouse of the original TSP participant can be a beneficiary participant. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the compliment. If my spouse dies, can my spouse transfer the money into her current traditional IRA? In other words, she does not need to create a new IRA. That is correct. So if Gary, if I'm assuming you have a TSP account, you die, your spouse now is going to be inheriting your TSP account. Again, the TSP will automatically transition it to a beneficiary participant account. Absolutely. She at that point can move it, transfer it over to her own traditional IRA. She does not need to create a new one. Even if your money is in an IRA account that she inherits, she can transfer your IRA account that she inherits to her own IRA account. That's something non-spouse beneficiaries cannot do, right? So that's why I mentioned earlier, spouses have a lot of latitude. They've got a lot of flexibility and options. If you have a charity as a beneficiary for a TSP, taxes don't have to be taken out. Correct. That was you asking that, correct? I wasn't saying correct. So in this case, right. So I mean, I'm trying to remember. There was a circumstance that I came across where taxes were withheld that were paid to a charity. I don't think it was from the TSP. I just vaguely remember this, and the charity could recoup that by filing tax return. But in most cases, I believe, just trying to think this, it might have been a TSP. The TSP may force the 20% withholding regardless of the charitable status or not. I'd have to do a little bit of digging into that, honestly, Brenda, on that one to see if it's possible. I mean, ultimately, the charity can recoup the taxes if it's withheld. But yeah, which might be another advantage of money going to an IRA account if that's the case, because they could elect to have no taxes withheld if it came from an IRA account. I need to do a little digging on that. Maybe if you email me, I'll get back to you. Will the TSP have a list of states that do not tax distributions? No, they're not. They're not going to. If you call them, they'll say we do not give tax advice. So you gotta, if you have a CPA or if you don't, then you just got to do some research on the state rules in which you live. If you have already retired and not actively contributing to TSP anymore, can you still participate in the conversion of traditional TSP funds to absolutely, yes. So that in-plan conversion is available to active and retired federal employees. Follow up on the earlier question of a beneficiary TSP transferred into surviving spouse's own TSP. In this case, does this sidestep the withdrawal timeline for a beneficiary TSP? Well, it does, yes, right? Because you're taking a beneficiary participant account, right, where you're the beneficiary of that account, not the owner, and then you're moving it into your own TSP account. So now, once it's in your own TSP account, it's treated as if it was always your own TSP, subject to normal TSP participant rules, right? So you're no longer dealing with those beneficiary participant rules. So that could be a negative or a positive, right? Depends on if you're younger or older than your deceased spouse. If you're older than your deceased spouse, it's going to be a little bit of a negative because you're going to take RMDs sooner out of your own TSP than you would otherwise that beneficiary participant TSP account. So maybe the option, if that's the case, again, I don't like the idea of keeping it in that beneficiary participant TSP account because that lump sum distribution. So transfer it to a beneficiary IRA. You're still delaying the RMDs, and then when that the deceased spouse would be subject to RMDs, and therefore that beneficiary IRA would be subject to RMDs, you could then transfer it back into your own TSP account. What if you don't have a spouse? Beneficiaries are adult children. Does the 90-day rule apply? That is specifically when the 90-day rule does apply, right? So when we're talking about non-spouse beneficiaries inheriting from a TSP participant, they have 90 days in which to elect a distribution option. If they fail to do so, the TSP will send them a check, withhold the 20% withholding, and it's going to be fully taxable. Again, assuming it's a traditional TSP. Are you aware? Yeah, I am. So are you aware of bipartisan bill introduced in the House and Senate called the Charity Parity Act that would allow qualified charitable distributions to be made from 401ks, 403bs, and other similar workplace retirement plans? Do you know if that would enable the Thrift Savings Plan to let us do QCDs from the TSP? Would letting the TSP, the second question is, would letting the TSP do QCDs raise the expense cost for TSP? And if so, might allowing QCD rollovers to an IRA be an alternative for Congress to consider? So there's three. Oh, all right. So let's take the first one. So yes, I am aware of that. When a law passes specifically like for 401ks, it doesn't automatically make it available in the TSP. It's its own separate law. They usually follow those rules though. So I would expect it to be allowed. But typically when they pass rules relating to 401ks, employer plans, 403bs, the plans can be more restrictive than the IRS code, right? So in other words, just because, and I don't know about in this case, right? This is just, they'll pass the law and then they'll actually write the code. But there's a number of rules out there that is allowed by the IRS. And actually, a great example is the one I mentioned about the joint life expectancy table for participants whose spouse is a beneficiary more than 10 years younger, right? The IRS allows that. The TSP chooses not to allow it. Okay, so a retirement plan, an employer plan, can be more restrictive than the actual rules allow in many cases. So I am aware of that law. I mean, of the bill. It's to be determined whether the TSP would allow QCDs then if it's passed. I'd probably say they would. And yeah, I mean, it could raise the costs if all of a sudden you've got participants requesting a bunch of checks. There's a very much an administrative aspect to processing QCDs. They go via check. Participants are requesting a lot more withdrawals in that case to do this. So yeah, it might be an issue. The whole thing about a rollover, QCD rollover, well, you don't even need a QCD rollover. You just roll over money to an IRA and then do the QCD. Although you've got some RMD issues in there. So I can see where a QCD rollover in theory could make sense if we're thinking along the same lines. So I don't know, but that's to be determined. We'll see. Hopefully it would be great if that law is passed or that bill is passed that the TSP would allow that. For a direct rollover, does the TSP send me a paper check? Yes, they do. Payable to the custodian. Did I understand you to say that if I start withdrawing money from my Roth TSP that has been established more than 5 years and I am 67.5 years old, the earnings portion will be subject to taxes? That's basically just the opposite of what I said. I said that if 5 years have not passed or you're younger than 59.5, then the earnings are taxable. You have to meet 2 requirements for a qualified withdrawal, and you need a qualified withdrawal for the earnings, Roth earnings, to be tax-free. That is, the Roth account's been open for 5 years or more, and you're older than 59.5. Okay, so if your Roth's been more than 5 years and you're 67.5, you meet the definition of a qualified withdrawal, and therefore you'd have tax-free earnings. See, another question: if a TSP participant's child already has a TSP account, then inherits a parent's TSP account, can the inherited TSP money be transferred to the child? No, they cannot. So only spouses have the option of transferring a deceased spouse's money into their own retirement plan. A non-spouse beneficiary cannot transfer an inherited retirement account into their own retirement account, whether that's an IRA or TSP, right? Their option is to either take a lump sum distribution or to transfer it to an inherited IRA, and that inherited IRA is subject to distribution rules that their own IRA or TSP account is not. If you do a Roth conversion over several years, is there a 5-year wait for distribution for each conversion? So there, yes, there is a 5-year rule that applies. And again, this is a separate 5-year rule than the one necessary for qualified withdrawal. So there's a separate 5-year rule that applies to each conversion you make. As I mentioned, though, if you're over 59.5, it doesn't matter, right? Because what this 5-year rule does, its purpose was to prevent people from taking money from a traditional tax-deferred retirement plan, which, again, as I mentioned, if you take a distribution from that plan, is subject to a 10% early distribution penalty when that distribution occurs before 59.5, right? Unless there's an exception, of course. So what the IRS is doing with this rule is they're preventing somebody from converting, let's just say, traditional IRA to a Roth IRA and then turning around and distributing the converted dollars to avoid the 10% early distribution penalty. So that's why they put this 5-year rule into place. But again, it only matters if you're younger than 59.5 at the time of distribution. I answered this already. Can an RMD from an IRA satisfy RMD from a non-TSP annuity funded with IRA funds? Oh, okay. So it's a little bit different. So forget the TSP. We're not even talking about TSP. You've got an IRA and what sounds like an annuity in an IRA, right? So you have, what I'm reading here is 2 IRA accounts. So this is a little bit different. As I mentioned earlier, when you have multiple employer plans, you must take a separate RMD from each employer plan you hold. The rules are different for IRAs. The IRS kind of views, in many cases, IRAs as one big pot of money. So they allow you to aggregate the value of these IRAs, calculate the RMD, and take that RMD from one or more of the IRAs. Technically speaking, you calculate the RMD of each IRA, and you're allowed to take the RMD from one or more of the IRA accounts. So you could use a distribution from one IRA to satisfy the RMD of another IRA, as long as you're taking out the total RMD value collectively for the 2 of them. TSP will not take state tax out. State of Virginia says, I am not withholding enough. How do I fix this problem? Yes, that was one of the downsides that I mentioned. One of the pros of moving money to an IRA that I mentioned is that TSP will not withhold state income tax. And as I mentioned, right, doesn't mean it's not taxable. It is. You're in Virginia, so am I. Distributions from TSP and IRAs are taxable. The way you fix the problem is you make an estimated tax payment, right? So if you're taking distributions out of the TSP on a regular basis, the IRS and the state of Virginia and all states, they want their tax revenue as you earn your income, right? So you as a taxpayer are required to pay your taxes as you earn your income. If you do not pay enough in each quarter, they assess an underpayment penalty. Getting tongue-tied here. So to avoid that underpayment penalty, you need to make estimated payments. Or what you could do is if you have income from other sources, you could increase the state withholding from the other income sources to make up for the tax that's due on the TSP withdrawal. A couple of different ways to approach it. If the beneficiary of my TSP is a family trust, the executor would have 90 days to move funds or distribute and pay taxes. Correct? Yeah, generally that is correct. That they're going to have 90 days to elect the distribution. Whether that's a lump sum, whether it's a transfer it to an inherited IRA held in the trust. Please explain again the difference between a regular IRA and inherited IRA. So a regular IRA is the IRA of somebody who's living, right? So if you contributed to an IRA account or you have a TSP account that you roll over to an IRA, that is your IRA account, right? And that IRA could be a traditional IRA or it could be a Roth IRA, right? An inherited IRA is where money is held when a non-spouse beneficiary, in most cases, inherits money from another individual. So if you passed away, okay, and your child inherits your IRA account, they would open an inherited IRA and move your IRA into that inherited IRA. And now they're a beneficiary maintaining an inherited IRA subject to distribution rules. So an inherited IRA basically is somebody who's inherited money from somebody else, retirement plan money from somebody else. Okay, so in this case, we got a question that says the TSP participant dies. The spouse transfers the TSP money to her TSP account. So now all this money that's in the surviving spouse's TSP account is treated as if the surviving spouse always owned this money, right? It's their TSP account. So now in this case, when the second spouse dies, does the children count as beneficiary participants or secondary beneficiaries? Well, I hate to break the news to you, neither, right? Because again, a beneficiary participant can only be the surviving spouse of the original TSP participant. Okay, secondary beneficiaries in my example are only beneficiaries of a beneficiary participant. So in your case, if both you and your spouse were federal employees and had your own TSP account, right, and your spouse passes away, you transfer your spouse's TSP into your own TSP account, your children now are just beneficiaries, right? And so when you pass away, you are the participant. You're the original TSP participant. You're not a beneficiary participant. So when you pass away, your kids will have the option to take a lump sum distribution or transfer it to an inherited IRA. I've answered that multiple times. Think about you can't satisfy a TSP RMD with an IRA RMD or vice versa. All right, a couple more questions here. So if you have a Roth TSP if a Roth TSP beneficiary inherits a Roth TSP within its 5-year existence as a Roth TSP from TSP in-plan conversion, must the beneficiary meet the 5-year existence to avoid taxation on the inherited TSP Roth earnings? Okay, that's actually, there's a lot to unpack there because you're talking about a 5-year rule applying to the conversion, I think, and then there's this, which is separate from the 5-year rule necessary for the earnings to be tax-free. I'm gonna take one thing at a time. So in order for earnings to be tax-free, you have to have a qualified distribution. The account has to be in existence for at least 5 years, and the Roth owner has to be at least 59 and a half. Okay? So we'll take it there. So you pass away. You say you opened up the Roth TSP 2 years ago through contributions. All right, so you've got contributions and earnings. You pass away. It goes to your beneficiary, your kid. So your kid has not met the 5-year requirement for tax-free earnings. Right. So if they take a distribution from that inherited Roth account within 5 years, they're going to pay tax on the earnings. They don't pay the penalty because, again, beneficiaries never have to pay a penalty, but they will owe income taxes on the earnings. If they, once that Roth account, and in this case, you'd be an inherited Roth IRA, collectively, once the Roth TSP and the inherited Roth IRA have been in existence for 5 years, then the earnings are tax-free. Separately from that, if we have a conversion that happens, right, the money's been converted from traditional TSP to a Roth TSP. There's a 5-year clock on that conversion also. If you're older than 59 and a half, it doesn't matter. And you pass away, it goes to your kid. It's not going to matter for them either. They can take the conversion dollars out tax and penalty free because, again, beneficiaries are not subject to that 10% early distribution penalty. But again, in order to get those earnings out tax-free, separate 5-year rule for qualified distributions, the entire Roth account had been open for 5 years. It gets really muddy. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to explain it in clarity here. I will let's see, a couple more questions and then we'll shut it down. If you have a spouse inherited TSP account, they can transfer it to an IRA, and the secondary can then be the heirs to that IRA without the lump sum penalty. Just clarifying. That is correct. So we have TSP participant dies, passes it to spouse. The spouse is now a beneficiary participant. Right? If that beneficiary participant, that surviving spouse, transfers it to an IRA of their own, or even an inherited IRA, the beneficiary of that IRA or inherited IRA will now be allowed to transfer that inherited IRA to an inherited IRA of their own, or that IRA to an inherited IRA of their own. They're not forced into a lump sum distribution. All right, Patricia, if you're moving to a retirement community and won't put your current home on the market until reached on a wait list, the entry fee can be made as a withdrawal from TSP, paid directly to me. If full amount plus tax withheld is paid back within 60 days, then that amount can be submitted to an IRA custodian. This would be an RMD withdrawal. First of all, you cannot roll over back your RMD amount, right? So RMD has to come out still. That will be taxable. But you, yes, within 60 days could roll over that full amount plus taxes back into an IRA, and to avoid that being the rest of it being a taxable distribution. Touch base with me on that one. All right, so I think that is it. I think that's all my voice can handle. I really appreciate everybody's time today and a lot of great questions. I know there's a lot of unanswered questions. I got through about 2/3 of them. And so we have an email up here, fedbenefits@narf.org. So if your question did not get answered directly or wasn't answered via somebody else's similar question, then feel free to email us and we will get to your questions and emails just as soon as we can. So once again, this has been recorded and we'll be posting this to NARF's website along with all the presentation slides in its entirety in about 24 hours. So I hope everybody has a great day. And as Ellie and I were talking about earlier, it is Friday Eve. So enjoy it and have a great weekend. And we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.